Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Alvers, and welcome to This Week in Anderson on the Big Eye Sports Podcast on USGA Sports. And flying solo today, we had a little technical difficulties with Steve getting on with us. But it's a pleasure to get back a hold of Mike Whan. Mike and I talked a few years back for the Anderson football alumni, and joining us. So, I was back in the day with Mike. I was a lonely little freshman walking the halls at Anderson High School, and he was a senior with my brother. So, as I said, joining us is Mike and Mike Whan. And Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I'm glad to be here.
So let's go back to the days growing up in Anderson. I'm not sure if I got this right or wrong, but I believe that you either moved into Anderson High School, either your junior or your senior, and I can't remember which one it was. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was right at the end of my sophomore year. It was baseball season of sophomore year. I remember my first day at school, I went right to a baseball practice that afternoon. So it was right at the end of the school year of sophomore year. So, it's funny. I hated my father for moving us from Chicago to Cincinnati in the middle of high school. I remember yelling at him and said, "Who does that to their kids?" And then about 35 years later, I did that to my three kids when we moved them from California to Florida. So be careful what you yell at your parents about, because it'll come back to haunt you.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, that transition that you did, obviously, I know you and I talked before about that, but going to a brand new school, going to Anderson High School, what was that transition like for you, going to a brand new school and starting when you did?
Well, just like anybody else, but you grow up, and I grew up in Naperville outside of Chicago, and had been there since second grade. So, you walk into that high school, you knew everybody, you knew every coach, you generally knew the teachers. And then, just one Monday, I literally remember standing in front of my closet thinking, I wonder if people dress the same, it's silly what you think of at age 15. The most horrifying moment was lunch. Because you walk in, so I went to class, I was a newbie, and then I walked into lunch, and you walk out of there with your tray and you think, like, where do I sit? And I remember I sat all the way at the end with this table with these other kids. And when I sat down, they all got up and left. Really? So that probably should have been my first clue in life. But I remember eating lunch and as fast as I could. And then I went down to the locker room and, I read a book or something. And I remember just thinking, God, I can't wait for this day to end. And from day two on, it was unbelievable. But day one was, it just challenges everything. You leave a really core, comfortable situation. I knew my coaches in sports. I knew my teachers. And all of a sudden, you were brand new in a class. And it turned out to be a great move for me. Anderson was a little smaller school than I was coming from in Chicago. So I had the opportunity to do more things, I think, at Anderson than I might have in Chicago. The friends that I met those 2 years I was at Anderson are friends for the rest of my life. It made going to college really easy, because for me, 2 years later, to show up on a college campus, I felt like I had just done that. Like I had just figured out how to make new friends. It was actually easier in college because every kid in college is trying to make new friends. But when you walk into a high school, nobody really needs a new set of friends. So it was a good test. Today I call it a good test. Back then it was probably a terrifying test. But like I said, it turned into great sports, great school. It led to a great launch in my life, and I've got nothing but positive memories of Anderson Township.
Oh, that is just a great story. Then, before you came to Anderson, did you play a lot of sports growing up as a little kid? And what were some of the sports that you played growing up as a little kid?
Yeah, I was a football, basketball, and baseball player, and played all three until I got to Anderson. I remember there was a team that was 1 year older than us that went to the state finals in Anderson. And on a summer practice, one of the coaches said, "Why don't you come out and play with us at a summer practice?" It was in between football and baseball season. And it was like some Monday night, gym pickup. And I remember thinking about 4 minutes into that pickup, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. This team was over my head, and I wasn't used to not being good at a sport. I could usually walk into any sports setting and at least compete. And I wasn't competitive there. And it was, I remember coming home and saying to my dad, "Looks like baseball and football for me." And so myself and Tom Brenneman, if that name probably does ring a bell for you guys, when you say that in Jersey, you got to explain it. But Tom Brenneman and I ended up going to work at Cube Cable, which was the beginning of cable TV. Yes. And during basketball season, we would do the Friday night basketball game of the week. And so the two of us would go to different schools and do a high school basketball game on Cube Cable. So in a weird way, stopping playing basketball kind of introduced me to another side of the sport that really, when I went to college, I originally went there to be a sportscaster.
Wow, that is crazy. I didn't know that you did that with Tom. That's kind of crazy. And that team you're talking about was with Frank Brandy and all those guys. We've had a couple of those guys on. and Tim Ferguson, and
Yeah.
probably one of the greatest high school basketball teams in Anderson high school history.
I remember, the only thing I remember about Brandy is watching him blow by me when I thought I was playing defense on him. So it was pretty clear that I didn't have that capability. That team ended up going pretty far. In fact, when Tom and I went to do we went to do the high school state championships, and that year it was being played at Miami of Ohio. And so after we did the play-by-play of whatever the semifinal game was, I went out with a buddy of mine from Anderson, whose brother was at Miami University, and that was sort of my first taste of both college and Miami. I ended up going to Miami 2 years later. It was just such a great experience, and I really found Miami because of this TV broadcasting gig that we had, which was kind of humorous, Dan. We only had one camera and one microphone. So I would say something like, let's go down to Tom in the locker room and see what the coaches have to say. We'd literally say, cut, run down the stairs. I'd hand Tom a microphone. He'd hand me the camera and he'd say, thanks, Mike. And we'd edit it later to look like we were just cutting between shots. But who knew? I mean, it turned into a real career for him. But clearly I was not capable to hang at his level.
That's great. That's a great story, though.
Yeah.
So you played football and baseball at Anderson. Let's first start talking about the baseball career. I know you played with my brother Mike, and I want to kind of get into one guy that I was familiar with was Jerry Wolf. Was a good baseball player. Talk a little bit about Jerry, because I'm not sure a lot of people really understand how good he really was.
Yeah. So when I got there, I was a sophomore, and I started playing on the JV team, and I got lucky at some point. They asked me to come and play remember there was I don't remember what it was called, but it was our crosstown tournament. It was like King of Anderson or something.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. The best of the East or something like that.
Yeah. Beast of the East or something like that. Yeah. So the time I get called up to play, I'm playing in that. And Wolf was the only other kind of sophomore on that team. So I kind of got to know him and be comfortable with him. I do remember, I don't think it was in that tournament, but I got pulled into to be a pitcher at the end of the game, like a relief pitcher. And I remember the game was close, and Turpin had a kid who was the catcher, and he ended up going to play for the Yankees. I mean, I wish I'd have known that then. It made me feel better. Yeah, but Lawrence hit a ball on me that bounced onto the roof of the middle school, which, if you know from home plate, that would have gone out of 2 baseball parks. And I mean, I remember thinking as he hit it, like, I've never seen a ball lift like that. And it was, the last pitch I think I threw at the varsity level for a couple of years. But yeah, Jerry was special. And I mean, I sort of knew he was special. One, I couldn't hit him in batting practice. And we played in a couple summer leagues together, a couple of travel ball leagues. And I remember being at a game one time, and I was batting leadoff, and he said to me as he walked by, "See those 2 guys back there?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "One's from Michigan and one's from Michigan State." And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking they came here to watch me play, And that later I realized when I walked up to the plate, both of those guys were at the concession stand. But when Jerry walked out to the mound, they all got their notes out and started getting the gun. So I realized, it had nothing to do with me. But yeah, he was a special athlete. It reminds me of a couple guys I knew, like a Joe Dayton and a Brandy and Wolf. It's unique when your best player on your team is also the hardest worker on a team. And Jerry was the guy that, when we'd all leave and hop in the car and go home, he was still doing drills. No, not coached. Nobody was telling me. He would have researched some other way to strengthen his arm or to push off the mound. And he was, I've always said the best teams I've been on were when the best player was the hardest worker, because it didn't require the coach to say anything. And Jerry was that on our team.
Yeah, he was definitely good. I'm drawing a blank. I think Lynn Moore was your coach. Talk a little bit about playing for Lynn Moore and some of the guys that you played with during your baseball career.
Yeah, I think Lynn Moore was the coach my senior year. I don't think it was my junior year, but I don't remember now. And I was dating Molly Moore, so that was really very unique. That my girlfriend's dad was now my coach, so I had a bunch of reasons why I couldn't screw up, which didn't stop me from still being bad in the position. But it was for me, for the longest time, most of the coaches and a lot of the sports at Anderson were also teachers. And so while they were really good coaches and really passionate about it, they generally had another job. And this was sort of an afterthought job or another vocation. But Lynn came in as a former high level college player. And this was the thing he was most passionate. He wasn't teaching history or teaching my study hall. And he brought a level of a lot of expertise to the game and a seriousness about what we were doing that that was good for a young kid who thought he was going to be a walk-on quarterback at Miami at the time to kind of go through, which is, no drill in Lynn's world came without competition, no matter what we were doing, bunting, fielding, everything was a competition. So when you actually got into competition and the game was tight, it didn't feel odd. You'd put as much pressure on yourself Wednesday at practice as you did Friday afternoon at a game. So it was an interesting, I've used that in golf. Like I never will practice golf without some sort of competitive drill, because you gotta remember what it feels like on Sunday at 3 when you gotta make the chip. And so he had a really nice knack of making competition fun and normal. So when you felt stress, it wasn't really that strange. It was normal.
Yeah. And I'm going to have to say one of your combination there at shortstop was my brother Mike was the second baseman, I believe. So you guys, I remember Mike always telling me the stories about you guys. And I think one in particular was telling me about a story about Ty Burdick pitching, a young kid. And I remember him saying you go into the mound to try to relax him after I think he was not pitching very well. Moose kind of brought that story up to me.
Well, if you know Ty Burdick, there's nothing you can say to calm him down. And I'm the last guy that should calm anybody down because I rev pretty high on the engine. It's too bad. Yeah, your brother Mike would have been all world if he had a better shortstop to turn to with.
I don't know about that.
He was, he was not only, Mike was not only a good athlete, he was a good guy. Like in every locker room needs the guy that pulls the locker room together. And that was Mike. No matter good game, bad game, he was the same guy coming out of the locker room, which was great. So yeah, there's, a lot of good memories. I mean, it's funny. I've seen like Lynn Moore on Facebook before, and, commenting, we've sent a note back and forth, but I haven't really been to Cincinnati much in the last, 30 years. And so it'd be nice to kind of get back and pull that crew together, that baseball crew that's probably located all over right now.
Yeah, I would love to see, I'd love to be a part of that just because you guys were all seniors when I was a freshman. So I remember a lot of you guys. So let's kind of get into the football scenario. You played for Coach Stowe. I played for Coach Stowe. I absolutely loved Coach Stowe. He got me to play football. He just couldn't get it over the hump with that team. But talk a little bit about the playing football for Coach Stowe and also for the Anderson program.
Yeah, when I think of Coach Stowe, I think of toughness. He had it and he instilled it in you. He made you believe. I remember one time I was a quarterback and a safety, but I was also the guy that would return punts. And I don't think it had anything to do with speed because I didn't have that. But it certainly wasn't elusive because I didn't have that. But I had pretty good hands. So he knew I wouldn't fumble a punt that was kicked. But because I didn't like the idea of catching a ball while somebody was running full speed at me, I would fair catch a lot. And one time we were in a game and it was a pretty close game. And this punter on the other team was pretty good. So he was always punting it long. And I'd fair catch it because I just wanted to get the ball and start throwing it. Right. And so he pulled me over. They called timeout before the punt. And he called the equipment guy over and he said, you got two choices. You can either return this punt or this guy, and he pointed to the guy with all the tape, is going to tape both of your hands to your sides and you're on your own. So he said, that hand will not go up and wave. So, of course, I'm sitting back there thinking, please, God, don't punt this high. Don't punt this high. But, he was a guy that instilled toughness. It was good for a quarterback because sometimes the quarterbacks, they give you the red jersey in practice and nobody can touch you. But Coach Stowe was the first guy that if you were in a tough tackling drill, he would put me in the front of the line too, because he wanted everybody to be tough, not just the guys up front. So yeah, it's I'll remember him as a guy that brought toughness to a kid who probably didn't have it.
Yeah, I agree. He was just a great guy. I love, like I said, I loved him to death. He was one of my favorite coaches. But let's talk about, I want you to kind of bring up this story again. We talked about a story previously about playing quarterback and throwing a pass. I believe it was Andrews that bring that story up a bit real quick, because I'm sure those guys are going to want to love to hear this.
Yeah, if Andrews comes on next, you'll probably get the real story. My story is probably filtered through my memory, but I honestly can't remember which team we were playing, but it was one of these teams that was ranked, kind of top 5 in the city. And I don't think people gave us, a shot to be in it. And we tied the game with, a couple of seconds left. And so we decided to go for 2, which was typical Coach Stowe. Like, screw it. Nobody expected us to be here. We're not going to kick a field goal and tie this game. We're going to go for the win right now. So he called a little out pass that we had hit probably 100 times that game. And Mike Andrews, goes on a little 5-yard out. I fake an off tackle handoff. And so I fake the off tackle handoff and I see Mike and he is wide open. Like, the safety has bit on the run fake. And so he's just standing there, God love Mike. He was tall enough and thin enough. How could I miss him? And I blew it about 3 feet over the top of his head. And God love Coach Stowe. Like in film session the next Saturday morning, he's like, Andrews, can you not jump? Can you not get up and get that? And I knew, and Coach Stowe knew that there was no chance Mike Andrews was going to get that pass. Like that thing couldn't have been caught by Wilt Chamberlain. But, in protecting me, I was just, hyped up, saw him wide open and flew it right over his head. It was probably our senior year claim to fame, and I totally screwed it up.
That's a great story. I'm sure these guys are going to love it. Tony, Diane, I'm sure will be reflecting on that a little bit later when he gets a hold of me. So experience, I've always had the McNick Anderson games were always something special. Talk a little about what you remember about those Anderson McNick games.
Yeah, what I remember is Terry Brennan, who was a good buddy of mine, who was on our team and a receiver of mine, had a cousin who was on the McNick team. I don't remember his name, but he was kind of their superstar running back. And he tripped over me 1,000 times that game on the, I never really tackled him, but sometimes I got in the way of his legs. And I remember one time I told Terry the next day after practice, I would grab him around his legs and his calf was about the size of my waist, this kid. And I kept thinking to myself, this guy is he's on the wrong team, But it was the nice thing about, I don't know if it's still the case, Dan, but when we played, McNick was always the first game of the year. So you had all summer, all spring, all 2-a-days, all spring practice, all preparing for one team. So, I don't really remember a lot of the games we played at Anderson, and that's my short-term memory protecting me, so I don't think about my lack of talent. But but McNick games had season-long buildups, so we were always going to start the season, and sort of like it or not, if you beat McNick, it was probably going to be a pretty good year, and everything was rosy. And if you lost, you were starting as an 0-1 team, and that was always a tough comeback. And so I didn't live there growing up, but everybody else on the team had friends that both went to McNick and played on the team. So both the pregame and the postgame were always pretty unique. People were screaming at each other and talking a bunch of smack back and forth. I couldn't really partake in that because I hadn't really grown up there and known it, but I knew how important it was to my crew. And thinking back and watching my 3 boys grow up and play against their crosstown rival teams, I've used the McNick story a lot to my own kids in terms of some games are just more important than others. Right. Story, like you could go 5-6, but if you beat McNick, it was an okay year. It's the Ohio State, Michigan logic. Yep. Nobody really remembers your season, but did you beat McNick?
Yeah, that's the same way. It was same way with Turpin too. It was the same thing. It was, but they don't play McNick anymore. Unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's too bad.
It was Anderson kind of took off.
Not too big.
And they were started to blow them out a little bit, so they kind of got away, and then they got back and played a couple times here and there. But they still play Turpin. Turpin's in the same league with them. But was there any thoughts for you after high school to play? You said something you wanted to play quarterback. Was there any thoughts of you wanting to play in college?
Yeah, I was a walk-on quarterback at Miami for about 3 weeks. Actually, a guy I work with today who's at the USGA was a walk-on quarterback with me, same year, same days. He walked on for 3 years, so significantly more talented than Mike Whan. But I had been recruited by Miami, and it was my first, you take 5 visits, and it was my first visit. And, if you've ever been to Miami, it was a beautiful Saturday morning. It was back when Miami didn't play down at the end of campus. It was right in the middle of campus. Younger kids today wouldn't be able to fathom that, but it was kind of like right in where the big, science building is today. So, we met at the athletic office, and we actually, rather than walk down to where the field is, you walk back up through the middle, you walk through fraternity row actually. And it was a Saturday morning, and the fraternities were doing something they called kegs and eggs. So there was kegs on the roof. There were sorority girls laying out, guys, partying, and I'm walking as a high school senior with the coach up to the game. And I remember my mom looking back at me, and my eyes must have been huge. And she said, "What are you thinking?" And I said, "I think I'm going to be living here in about 6 months." Like I was pretty sure that's where I was going. I was fairly convinced I was going to play in the NFL someday, but I was the only person on earth that was convinced that. I remember when the first depth chart came out, about 3 weeks in, and I thought I'd had some pretty good practices. There was 16 quarterbacks or something in camp, and the depth chart came out, and they hung it on the window of the locker room, and I didn't see my name on the depth chart, and I thought that's weird. So I went to the coach. I said, "Hey, coach, I think there's been a mistake. Like there's no M1 on the depth chart." And he said, "Did you turn it over?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's just a piece of play. You just turn it over." So I went back, turned it over, and on the page 2, it said, all other quarterbacks. And there was like a list of 12 of us. And I remember thinking, I'm an all other quarterback. That can't be good news. So I had always been a pretty good student. I definitely chose Miami for the school more than the sport. I wasn't sure, but I remember I was so nervous to call my dad because I was convinced that my father was convinced that I was going to the NFL. I was just, Miami was just a stopover. And so it took me days. I mean, I'd stopped playing on the team. It took me 2 or 3 days to call my dad. I remember calling my dad and said, "Oh, Dad, I decided that I'm not going to play football after all. I'm going to focus on academics." And, it would have been 4 years for me to ever see the field, and that wasn't worth it. And my dad said, "Okay, well, how are classes?" And like, he just moved on. Yeah. I'm like, holy cow, even my dad knew that I wasn't very talented. So it was a great experience. I met some really lifelong friends, including, like I said, I work with the guy that I met as walk-on quarterbacks at Miami. We actually both went to Procter & Gamble after school. So Miami was a great experience for me. I can't say I had a great football experience because 3 weeks doesn't teach you much. It taught me that I'd better focus on academics because athletics weren't going to save me.
Yeah. Who was the coach back then?
Oh, I want to say
was it Randy Walker or Hebner or
no, he left. He went to North Carolina State the year after my freshman year. He was a defensive guy. He was only at Miami for a year. I can't remember his name. I want to say Kirk. But
I don't even remember what his name is either. But I was thinking it might have been those two. But so
I wasn't there long enough for us to get to know each other.
Yeah. Let's get into your career. You mentioned P&G that you worked there. So your progression to get where you are right now as the CEO of USGA.
It's funny. We've talked a lot about sports, and I was meeting one time with Condoleezza Rice out in Stanford, and on her desk, like on her bookcase, kind of like behind mine, there was a plaque, and it said, "Nothing I learned from leadership came from a classroom." And I remember thinking, we started talking about that, and I said, "Man, is that true?" I mean, like, you can learn a lot in a classroom. You can academically advance yourself, but when it comes to leading your peers, like, you have to do that outside a classroom. And she said, "I mostly did that on a ball field, on a playing field." I said, "So did I." And she said, "The good thing about sports is you can learn how to lead unsuccessfully, and it only makes you better. Like in business, when you learn how to lead unsuccessfully, it tends to be a while before they let you lead again. But when you're young and you lead in sports, you learn all the stupid things about what to do and what not to do." And I've said this many times, I was a quarterback, not because I was talented. I was just good enough to know the offense. And my coaches used to say to me when I was really young, your job is to get the ball out of your hands and in the hands of a better athlete as soon as possible, whether that's throwing it, pitching it, or handing it off. Yeah. And when I was young, that used to offend me. But I'm 57 now, Dan, and I'm the same quarterback that I was when I was 11. I mean, I'm the CEO of a business, and I've been a CEO since I was 39. And people ask you, like, what's the key to being a good chief executive? And I said, in my case, it's filling my huddle with more talented athletes, and then knowing that my core job is to get the ball out of my hands and into one of their hands sooner. Like, know the play, know the offense, read the defense, and then just make sure you're not the athlete we're counting on. Like, when I was young, that was really hard to take. It was offensive, and I didn't want to believe it until I was on page 2 of the depth chart. But that experience probably has made me a better leader. And like I said, I mean, I did fine in school. I was a good academic student, and but there's a million of those. And that in the business world, you'll compete with a lot of really smart people, but the difference is, can you lead people to a common purpose? And all of that happened in a huddle. All of that happened in a timeout. All of that happened in a dugout somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. That's some great advice. And like you said, it progressed you. I think, thinking about what you said, you at P&G to everything that I think, what was it, P&G, and then you went to, was it Wilson? Is that correct? Or? Yeah.
So I was at Procter & Gamble about 8 years. And, if you're staying at P&G that long, you tend to, stay forever. My dad had worked at P&G. We had moved to Cincinnati when I was in high school. So I looked like the guy that was probably going to be a Procter & Gamble guy for life. And I liked it. A lot of the people who they hire from the two coasts don't like Ohio. I loved Ohio. So there was really nothing. There was really no reason for me to leave P&G, but I wasn't, I didn't feel like I was putting, what I was passionate about and what I do every day in the office together. I mean, listen, I ran Crest toothpaste. And if you want to talk about gum health and tartar control, I can get as excited about it as any human being can. But what really moved me was sport. And I got a call from somebody that were looking for the head of the golf ball and golf glove business. When I was younger, before I moved to Cincinnati, I was a caddy, and then I worked on the grounds crew of a golf course. And so when I moved to Cincinnati, I got a job at Coldstream, and I worked summers at Coldstream until I graduated from college. I mean, I was cutting greens and changing hole locations and mowing fairways. A lot of times still dressed from the night before because you start at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'd be in cowboy boots and jeans cutting greens on a member guest Saturday morning. So the golf course to me had always been kind of a special place. We're also kind of a weird family. We don't have like the Sunday dinner, my family and I, and everybody talks about their week. I learned about life like on a golf course. My dad told me my sister was sick on a golf course. My mom gave me the birds and bees speech on a bleachers behind the ninth green at a golf course in Chicago. I told my parents I was leaving P&G and my father cried, true story, on a golf course. So to me, the golf course has almost been like church for my family. So when I had a chance to go work in golf, it felt more like a calling. And it obviously was, because here I am at age 57. I think I probably left at 28 or 29 from P&G, and I've worked in sports ever since.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a, just a great, great story. And, and I know one of the things that, we talked about a little, during this whole thing is I know that you do the golf outing with some of those guys that you were in high school. How special and how cool was that you are still friends with the guys that you were with in high school? You mentioned Terry Brennan, Tony Diana, Randy Corbett, some of those guys. Talk a little bit about that friendship and that bond that you guys have with your golf outing.
Yeah, it's weird. I raised three boys, and each of them has had sort of their own bond with high school buddies. And in most of those three cases, they're tighter with their college buddies than their high school buddies. I knew even when I was a junior in high school that I was hanging around guys I'd be friends with the rest of my life. I don't really know how I knew it, but it was as good a friendships as I'd ever had in my life. And they were just good people. They cared about me, and they cared about my family more than any friends that I'd really known, other than a couple before that. So, and I went to Miami, and most of them went to UC. So we were close. I mean, we were physically close enough that we would see each other plenty, but I never had any doubt that group would stay connected. And we had, guys like Randy Corbett are more than just good friends. They're glue. I mean, Randy keeps us as a group. He did it in high school. Like, he was the offensive tackle, but clearly the captain of the team. And not too many football teams could tell you that their offensive tackle, and he got hurt before our first game and was out most of our senior year and was still the captain of our team. So, and you have seen how his life has progressed in Anderson. He's been the captain in Anderson since he was, 14 years old. So yeah, Randy started something called the Redskin Roundup. And every couple of years, Randy would pull together our high school buddies at a golf outing. It started in Myrtle Beach, and then it's moved around a bit. It's in Phoenix this year. It was in Florida. For the longest time, I lived in California, and I went to one of them, and I just said to Randy, I got to be honest with you, after a full year of work to fly to there and back. And so when I moved to Florida and I was the commissioner of the LPGA, he said, what would it take for you to come to a Redskin Roundup? And I said, well, you'd have to do it in Florida, and you have to do it during my 1 month of off season, which is December. And so for the longest time, every Redskin Roundup was in Florida in December. I mean, to Randy's credit, he made it easy for me, and it was great. So, those guys are tight. It's funny. I just moved to New Jersey, and one of my best friends in life is Mike Andrews from Anderson, and he's lived in New Jersey for 25 years. And I took this job and called him and said, great news, buddy, I'm coming to New Jersey. And he said, we're moving in May. And I moved in June. So we missed each other. We've gotten together a few times since, but I'm only about 20 minutes from where he raised his kids. And so just, strange things happen. But yeah, it's a unique group of friends. Any one of those guys I could call right now and say, I'm in trouble, and they'd all be here. And I'd do the same for them, even if we've got a group chat. And so whether it's a birthday, with UC's football season, I had to weather through 700 texts a day about how good UC was. And so the combination between the Cincinnati Bengals and UC football, we've been closer this year than ever before because we shared some common passions.
Yeah, I'm sure. And Tony Diana and Randy Corbett, I'm, pretty close to those guys too as well. Just like you said, they would do anything for you, and they would do anything for a lot of us too. So they are definitely, big parts of Anderson High School. So you said you lived in Jersey now. So talk a little bit about, I know you said you moved from Florida to Jersey. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when I left Procter and Gamble, I went to Chicago, and then from Chicago, I went out to California for about 20 something years. So, as much as we love living in California, you don't realize that the time change does kind of get you disconnected to your buddies on the East Coast. When we moved back, we moved to Orlando, and I took the job as the LPGA commissioner. I moved to Orlando. The job of LPGA commissioner is physically challenging, meaning you're just on the road a lot, both in the States and a lot of time overseas. I was probably spending at least 2 months a year in Asia for that job on and off. And, when you're raising 3 kids and you're traveling that much, it was a battle between doing the job right and the guilt of, I remember one time flying home from Korea to watch my son's high school football game. And the day after, Saturday morning, flying back to China, because I really shouldn't have been back there on Friday, but I didn't want to miss a high school football game because my dad never missed one of mine, So it was a tough job physically, but I loved it. I loved the gig. And then in late 2020, I said to my wife, I'd been doing it for 11 years. And I said, I think it's time for a younger, more caffeinated version of me to take it from here. I always tell people that these leadership positions are kind of like a relay race, and somebody puts the baton in your hand and you don't know how long you're going to have the baton. So your job is to run as hard as you can and as fast. And when we start slowing down, look for somebody who can run harder. And I'd said that in so many speeches that when it actually started coming true, when I realized that somebody else would probably look at the LPGA with even more upside and more vigor, and they'd go out even harder than I did. So I remember saying to my wife, let's take a year off. We have a house in Reynolds, Georgia on Lake. And I said, why don't we move to Reynolds? We'll just hang out there for a year and let me just catch up on sleep. And then I'll kind of figure out what I want to do next. And that was about Christmas of 2000. And then 2000. And so I announced on a Tuesday right after New Year's that I was going to leave the LPGA. And no quick leave. I was going to wait until they hired a new commissioner. But I announced on a Tuesday, and Friday, the United States Golf Association called and said, I think we've got a job that you'd be interested in. And I remember thinking, how am I going to break this to my wife that Reynolds and the Lake House is off for another year? But it was a nice, I didn't plan to come to the USGA. I actually didn't plan to go back to work that quickly, but golf's in me. It's a part of me. I love this sport. I love the people that play it. And I always felt like at the LPGA, it was my chance to leave the game a little better. And then somebody offered me the head job at the USGA. And I thought, even a bigger job with even more money, even more potential, even a bigger, kind of bat when you come up to the plate. I'm 57. I probably got one more solid swing. And this one just felt like my career had led to this. And it's been a great move. We moved here in May of last year. So we're coming up on 1 year here in a couple of months. And it's been an amazing experience for me. It's a rebirth. I'm excited all over again. Brand new people, brand new challenges, brand new city. I never thought I'd be a Northeastern guy. Yeah. I always sort of avoided New York and New Jersey, and now I have New Jersey on my license plate. So it's different, but I really love it. I love the challenge of it's a new huddle. It's like being a walk-on quarterback all over again. You got to earn trust. You got to learn the offense. You got coaches that don't know if you can play or not play. And I've always just sort of enjoyed the challenge. Maybe that goes all the way back to moving in the middle of high school, the challenge of making new friends, working your way onto a team, trying to get into a college when everything's brand new.
So is still a lot of travel, or not as much, or is it still pretty much?
So it's a lot of travel by anybody else's standards, but by a former commissioner standards, not so bad. And it's for the most part, 90% of my travels in America, as opposed to probably 50% of my travel on the LPGA was outside of America.
Well, that's good. So, as you said about your family, I know I do a lot of stuff with the broadcasting and stuff on the side. I have to have a great wife and support and all that. So talk a little bit about your family. Obviously, your wife is, while you're doing all the travels, talk about your wife and your kids.
Yeah. I always talk about balancing forces. Like, I hire people that are different than me because they make me better, and they don't, just because I said it, they don't care. And I probably learned that from my marriage, because I married somebody who's quite a bit different than me. And she's calm and sure of herself, and doesn't get too high or too low about the peaks and valleys in life. And I'm hyper and over caffeinated. So somewhere in the middle, like, we find real peace. And the great news about when you find that kind of chemistry is your kids become the winners. because they got just enough of me in them to be scary, and enough of their mom in them to be compassionate, good people, and have a better head on their shoulders than their dad did. So it's a neat thing. And so yeah, I've been lucky that I married somebody that was willing to watch me and let me kind of follow my passion, because she's born and raised in the same house in Columbus, Ohio, her whole life. I met her at Miami, but I didn't really know her at Miami. I met her at Flanagan's about 15 times when we were 1 year out of school. So anybody who thinks you can't meet your wife at Flanagan's, I'm here to tell you otherwise. But so we got married, and I mean, we both thought we'd be in Ohio the rest of our life. She worked at Lazarus as a buyer for men's clothes, and I worked at P&G. So we were the ultimate Cincinnati couple, and we both thought we'd probably live in Cincinnati. We got married in Hyde Park. I had my first kid at Christ Hospital. I mean, it was a Cincinnati story. And then I got the call about Wilson, and we went to Wilson, and from Wilson I went to TaylorMade and Adidas, and then I ran a hockey equipment company out in California for about 10 years. And then we moved to Florida. So for a young kid, a girl who met a guy, and she was born and raised and her parents, just left that house maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So they were 60 years in the same house in Upper Arlington, Columbus. So talk about meeting a guy that messes up your life. That was me. So we've got 3 boys. They're quite a bit older now. So I have a 28-year-old lawyer who works in Atlanta at a company called King and Spalding. He went to TCU undergrad and then Florida Law School. And my middle son went to High Point, North Carolina, and the Notre Dame grad school. He works for Hershey's in Connecticut. He's about 2.5 hours north of us here, so we get to see him more often. And my youngest is in grad school at University of Virginia. And kind of like his dad, he's got a real bug for the sports side of things. So he's becoming an athletic trainer. So last football season, he worked for the Florida Gators football team. Really? And he's got 1 more year of school, 1 more month of school at Virginia, and he's got a job for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So in May, he'll leave Virginia and move to Jacksonville. So I'll have 1 in Atlanta, 1 in Connecticut, and 1 in Jacksonville. So as much as my wife loves the West Coast, it looks like we're going to be East Coasters because we're not going anywhere if our kids are all East.
Yeah, that's a great story. Good for sounds like your kids are very successful. It's a credit to you and your wife. And so we'll try to wrap this up real quick here, but do you still keep in touch with, obviously, I guess you do because of the guys, your high school buddies. I was getting ready to ask you if you kept in touch with the athletics at Anderson and what was going on there.
Yeah, I wouldn't lie to you and say that I'm engaged with, what's going on sport-wise. When Randy Corbett was there, and I think even when he's not there, he's sort of there. Randy has kept me apprised. And I remember one time Randy said, I forget what the issue was, but there was a uniform issue, and I think it was on the golf team, the men's and women's golf team, and they needed new uniforms and didn't get it. And Randy called me and said, I'm not asking from the LPGA, I'm not asking for the USA, I'm just asking Mike Whan, would you help us? And I said, Randy, I mean, unfortunately, I've never known how to say no to Randy, both good and bad. We've gotten in trouble together and we've done a lot of good stuff together. But I said to Randy, you tell me who to send the check to, because if it's important to Randy, it's important to me. And I went back one time. Randy had me come back and speak to, I don't know if it was the football team. I forget. I came back. It was probably 8-9 years ago, and spoke and just walked the hallways again with Randy. And it was, again, I haven't been around Anderson Township in forever. Right. So, just everything about Anderson seemed bigger to me, right? The high school was bigger, the locker room was bigger, the stadium was bigger, and just go back and see it. And you realize that, almost everything I learned about leadership happened in those hallways, or happened on those fields, and everything that I did, I've learned that was wrong happened there too. It was a place where you could fail successfully, right. Both on the course. I mean, I started working at Cube Cable with Tom Brenneman, because remember Andy Wolf, the history teacher? Yes. Yeah. So Andy Wolf knew somebody at Cube Cable, and they wanted to do a high school game of the week. And Andy called Cube Cable and said, I've got 2 guys. One's a junior, one's a senior. That I think would be great at that. And he came to me and said, Mike, if you're not going to play basketball this season, I got something I think you'd really be good at and really enjoy. And so I've thought many times that, that was just a teacher who I sat in his classroom, who took the time to get to know. I didn't play a sport for him. I certainly wasn't a track star. And so it was, it was just the kind of place that helped me grow up. And, like I said, any chance I had to kind of help others that are growing up in the same environment, it's no different than giving back to the college that I've watched raise my kids. And I'm proud of what we did, my wife and I, but I watched my kids grow up at some really great institutions, and it makes me fans of those institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so thinking about it, like when I was kind of in the same era with you with football, it wasn't, the didn't have the very good records as we played in our 4-year high school career. But would you ever think that Anderson High School would win a state football championship?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's exciting. You know, you could. There was enough passion there. You know, we needed to. You know, once I think those neighborhoods and everything took off and those schools became big, it was exciting. But yeah, I remember thinking, why do we play Coleraine every year? Like that's a painful day for both a quarterback and a free safety. Yeah. I was either running for my life or running to catch up to some guy who was blown right past me. But it's great to see it. I mean, every school deserves it. And it was great to see Anderson, you know, sit on top as well. So yeah, I don't think I've seen a high school football game since I left, which is shame on me, but I haven't seen a college football game since I left either. If I was honest with you, Dan, when I walked away from football my freshman year, I needed to kind of get away from it for a while, because to me, I identified myself as a quarterback at Anderson or as a quarterback at Miami. And so for a while, when you walk away from sports, you sort of lose your identity for a second. You know, that's how people introduce. This is Mike Whan. He's a quarterback at Anderson. This is Mike Whan. He's playing here at Miami University. And so I kind of got away from sports for a while, mostly just because I was lost for a bit. And until you find the next big passion in life, it's hard to find that. And I mean, I got excited about the business school, but it took me a while to find that passion.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. So we'll wrap it up here, but there's the 3 questions that we kind of ask everybody at the end is, okay, if you have a favorite high school memory and maybe a college, and then if you don't, either one of those 2, then maybe you mentioned Mr. Wolf, maybe a high school favorite teacher.
Favorite high school memory is Fitzpatrick, Bob Fitzpatrick. That name ring a bell?
Yep.
His parents had a farm. I couldn't tell you where it was. It was, like an hour drive away. Yeah. And once a year we would we would go camping on the farm. And it's kind of like going to Vegas. Like, I don't know that I'd tell you many stories from the farm, but it was the trip where real bonding happened. I mean, and you smelled terrible and you looked terrible 3 days later when you came back. There was no shower facilities or bathroom facilities. It was just a piece of land. And I mean, we had these old Army tents. It was before tents were actually made with any kind of technology. And usually it would be pouring down rain the whole time we were there, but it didn't matter. But those, you can't remake those. Like, you could go try to have a guy's weekend on a farm and everything else, but I wouldn't live like that. And I wouldn't find that enjoyable. But back then it was sort of coming of age time. So yeah, definitely for me, it was camping with the boys and in the Fitzpatrick farm. I hope the Fitzpatrick farm still exists.
Yeah, I'm not real sure. Did you have a favorite high school teacher? Anyone?
Yeah, Coach Wolf. Andy Wolf would have been my favorite teacher. He was a guy who brought history to life every day. I was never a guy who would have been my dad was a history major in college. So my dad was always frustrated that I didn't find history more interesting. But Andy Wolf taught U.S. history and made me not only love history, made me love my country, and it made me want to be a teacher. I mean, really, when I was in high school, I really thought that when I retired from the NFL, I would be a high school teacher, because to me, he was a great example of molding people. Like, I wanted to have that kind of impact on people. And it's probably, why I've kind of stayed in the business world as long as I have. It's weird, but in business, when you're young, it's all about you and making it to the next level and getting promoted and achieving the next big job. But as you get older, and, for me, it's been maybe the last 15 years of my life, the real joy is watching people that were me, the 25 to 35-year-olds, kind of really take off and reach the heights in their career and achieve things as a team they didn't think they could achieve. So it's, when I was in high school in Chicago, my kind of high school quarterback buddy was Sean Payton. And so he kind of went on to do it as a head coach, and I've kind of went on to do it as a CEO. And I think both of us kind of do it because it's the joy of watching others kind of achieve their dreams right in front of you.
Yeah, that's all great story. Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time, and sorry we had a little delay there to get that going. I know all the guys are really looking forward to it, and I want to thank Tony. I think was kind of one that kind of helped me get this going. But I know a lot of those guys really love you and care a lot about you, and they probably can't wait to see this. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Well, thanks for keeping the memories alive of Anderson, and I look forward to at some point being back with all that gang at an Anderson game and remember what it was really all about. And they'll have to remind me of some of the stories that I probably have blocked from my memory banks. Well, I would love it. You just let me know. We'll work it out and try to get you there if you do make it in for a game and to get with everybody. And again, we really appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So for Dan Albers and Mike Whan, you've been listening to This Week in Anderson. We'll catch you next time.